just to start out, we all know this about technology and the work that we do. Technology changes quickly on the one hand, and it's totally changing the way we live and we work. And so as we think about corporate social responsibility and our work with companies and advancing social causes, it really has been and should be part of that conversation going forward. From my own background, I've been following the impact of technology on social change since around the time of the Netscape IPO in 1994, which is coming up on 20 years now. And to me, that's in some ways makes this year the 20th anniversary of the fully commercial online world. Created what we think of today as the modern consumer web. And things have changed so radically in those last 20 years, and some things haven't changed. And we're going to get into that. What's interesting to me is that while there have been so many changes in technology and communications, and changes that are really relevant to what we do, and I can remember back in the philanthropic sector when online transactions were actually controversial. Will people ever give money online? It's too scary. That was like the first big controversy. The big numbers in our society, and I think it's always worthwhile to mention this as we go out, the big numbers in our society on philanthropy really have not changed. We still, as Americans, give away roughly 2% of GDP per year after year, year in, year out, bust or boom. We're pretty philanthropic and pretty consistent. So while there's been a lot of technological change, a lot of new networks being formed and people coming online, the philanthropic picture modestly static. So think about that. On the other hand, in terms of how we work, it's clear that employees, and I know you've heard about this earlier today, and all the research backs it up, employees, especially younger employees, have different expectations about their jobs, how those jobs relate to social good, their involvement in causes, and frankly, the roles that their companies play in what they themselves think of what they stand for. All of the research does bear that out, and I think it's important for us as we consider moving forward to think about that. And obviously technology, not standing by itself, but how it's used by networks, plays a giant part of that. So if technology is changing how we give it work, how companies manage their social impact and employee giving programs, and how people communicate in general, what does that mean, and what do we have to think of in terms of strategy and tactics? So I like to kind of pose one kind of brief open-ended question to the panel, and maybe we can start down the far end with Nathan. Just if you can give me 60 seconds on your view, and we'll just sort of come right down. And it's a really interesting panel. We have two serious, experienced corporate guys, and we have two startup guys. So there may be a little tension there, and I'm going to do my best to create that tension as we go forward. So let's start down at the corporate end of things. Let me ask you guys, how is technology, whether it's mobile, crowdsourcing, or frankly the incredible choice that employees have outside of whatever your corporate program might be, how is that changing the giving and engagement environment for you?
Okay, I'm Nathan, and I will start. Nope. I'm actually not that serious. He looks serious to me. So, the way we look at technology is, or social and mobile for us is really the key. And we see that social and mobile are the keys to empowering team members to find the information they want, when they want it, and where they want it. And that information would include philanthropic information. And we don't really separate it. So we think that your mobile device, so we all have this mobile device, and we woke up in the morning, we checked Facebook to see what happened, we checked Twitter to see what's going on with the news, we checked our email, we might have checked the weather. It's your personal and your business are all one because of mobile. Mm-hmm. And so we're not separating the giving and philanthropic and volunteering. It's just part of your daily life. It's kind of the way that we look at it. And again, mobile's the key to that for us.
Okay, cool. Jeff?
I think that for us, when we start to think about the outside world impacting how the inside corporate world works, we're seeing the impact of consumerization. So everyone's used to the Amazon experience. They're used to transacting things in a way that is very easy, very smooth. They know what's going on at all times. And that kind of, I think, comes into play as we start to think about technologies that we deploy internally, where in the past it might have been okay to just have something that was very transactional. I think we need to have something that's very personal, so that when I get there, it's, hi Jeff, how are you? We know that you do these kinds of things. We know you're interested in these kinds of things. So kind of bringing in that kind of experience that they expect through the rest of their lives. You know, much like mobile is part of their overall life, how they expect to transact business in their lives influences how we should be addressing that internally.
Okay, great.
I think one of the really interesting trends with technology and giving is about empowerment. So you mentioned people wanting information, when they want it and getting it where they want it. It's also really important to give people what they want. It used to be okay maybe to have some fund that people could donate to, where all the money would go towards a certain cause. But now people really feel the need to have more control over their giving choices. And I think that's one of the main trends that we've seen in the last few years.
One thing that we have noticed is people's desire to be social, so getting cues from their peers or friends and so on as to what's working, what they should give to, what they should think about, what they shouldn't give to. A lot of those cues, I think, probably worked informally pre-social media, and now much more formalized and expected to be integral to that process.
Okay, so if and this is kind of a follow-on to, that we can all answer. If companies have their own strategies, and I think company strategies, corporate strategies have moved, I've seen them move in the past, say, 10 or 15 years from sort of, giving at work, basic kind of stuff, to much more signature program oriented, fitting the overall corporate strategy, focusing in on one or two areas where a company feels it can move the ball. But on the other hand, employees, especially young employees, are constantly connected, mobile, interested in many outside factors, outside things, outside causes that their friends are sharing with them. And we all get bombarded with this stuff constantly. And maybe I'll start with the two corporate guys down the end. How do you guys deal with that, and maybe speak to specifically how your companies deal with this, with the idea that your employees are going to be very active in philanthropy or causes outside the workplace, and yet you really do want them to be active inside too.
Let me start here. So I'd say, we do a couple of things. So so there's some things that we want to do from a corporate standpoint, and we have chapters, kind of volunteer chapters throughout our footprint. And so one of the things we're doing is we're taking and these volunteer chapters generally have a SharePoint site where the people in the chapter get together and nobody else knows anything about it. So we've helped these chapters by providing social sites now and encourage them to make these social sites using a Chatter, using a Jive, Yammer, open to others. So it's a way for them to communicate what it is that they, from a corporate standpoint, want to do, what are the causes that are important to them. And they can bring others into it by moving beyond the SharePoint site, becoming more social, making it open, and people can participate that way. At the same time, we're encouraging team members to start and join other communities, other groups on these social sites, where they can talk about whatever they want, right? They can talk about whatever causes are important to them. So we've got, from the corporate standpoint, we've still got that, and we've expanded that and broadened their audience, if you will. But then we've also given team members the opportunity to talk about their own giving, and so that's the way we work.
So let me just follow up with that. So then, if an employee brings in a cause from outside, and she's really passionate about it, is there an opportunity for the company or for teams of employees to get involved with her cause, even if it's not necessarily already part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple things. One is they could do it just in a general community. So we have some communities that are general, some communities just around volunteering, where they can talk about it. We're working on, and I can expand a little later on, we're working on some mobile apps, or mobile app where we're trying to match need with resources for projects inside, and we're expanding that for to allow people to talk about what kind of need they might need, some volunteer need for a cause they're interested in. So I do a lot of mentoring, and I know that the group that I do mentoring for always need mentors. And so I could put on that app potentially that, hey, I'm involved in this, and these are the kinds of things, they need more people like this. If you want to volunteer, contact me, kind of thing. So we're giving that opportunity. Again, we're focusing on both what's important to the organization and what some of our signature causes are, but then also encouraging others to talk about what they want to do, because we think that just helps everybody.
Okay. Jeff, you want to tackle that? How you guys deal with that same problem? Well, not problem maybe, but the inside outside.
You mean opportunity?
Opportunity.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So
exactly. That was the word I was looking for.
Oh, absolutely. So I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're going, because we're in the midst of a fairly significant transformation, which is a great corporate word. Corporations have to transform, and they have to be transformative. And if there's consultants, they can tell us what the next set of words are going to be. But we truly are changing out a lot of things in terms of what we are and where we're going. So for perspective, we're changing out 80% of our systems that support the work that we do broadly, and we're redoing most of our programs. So where we're going is we're going to a place where we will be making our employee base aware of the types of issues that are important to the corporation, but we'll also make sure that they're aware of opportunities that align with their personal interests. So they can see where the corporation's going, and they can participate in that in a variety of different ways, but they also have the opportunity to follow their own passions. So we're trying to, make sure that there's a balance in terms of their choice. And we think that gives them an opportunity to, A, be connected to where the company's going and feel that at work, but also feel their internal passions at work as well. So we think that we're on the path to make that happen. And like Wells Fargo, you might be a little bit further along, but we're engaging them socially. We're using a variety of social tools to build communities of volunteers and people that are engaged that way, giving them opportunities to share their experiences, share their interests, et cetera, going forward.
I'll stay with you guys for 2 more minutes before we come to the startup guys. Because it's interesting. A couple years ago, this is really interesting stuff. A couple years ago, 2-3 years ago, you might not have heard this, and you both work for companies in regulated industries. And so a few years ago, that would have been a stock answer. We're in a regulated industry, so we're thinking about this, and we're going to commission several studies. But you're both in different stages of kind of really moving forward with a more open view towards social, and I'd be really interested to hear, kind of why that is. Was that driven by your consumers, in this case, employees, who are saying this is how they really wanted to do it? What kind of drove that?
Well, I think from our perspective, the social aspects of it, we have a large use of social tools internally, but they tend to be used a lot for pushing out communication and for developing work groups, right? So I think that we've gone through, we are a little stodgy. We've gone through a little bit of a learning curve there, and I keep on saying to everybody, we're the cool kids. We have the things that are more interesting than perhaps, and none of my friends from annuities are here, but prudential annuities is probably not the most...
Those crazy annuities.
Yeah, it's not the kind of things that make most people's socks roll up and down necessarily, but the type of work we do, we feel is far more engaging for employees, and we hear that as we're talking with them verbally, and so there's very clear indications to us that as we start to introduce the social tools to them, that they'll really start to take advantage of those, and that we think that starts to build kind of the broader community in ways that perhaps Prudential Annuities hasn't, and give us a chance there.
But now Wells Fargo is even a step beyond that. I'd love to hear how that culture got driven to that point.
So Wells Fargo generally is pretty entrepreneurial. I mean, it's a big company, but it's very entrepreneurial. And you had you had many parts of the organization that were kind of dabbling in social. And so I think it was really kind of a ground up kind of thing, and then we would prove it out, and then it became, we just started a enterprise social media team a little over a year ago. So before that, it was really, so my team, for instance, I'm in the wholesale bank. We created that 3 years ago, and for a long time I was running internal social across the organization because there was nobody else doing that. And then we created this central team to do broadly social media and collaboration for the enterprise. So a lot of it was ground up, but we proved things like, for instance, we would do little things like we used to have, we still do, but we have adopt a family around holiday time. And we would have these adopt a family, it'd be the same kind of group of people that would do 1 or 2 families. And we created a social site and said, why don't you all get together here? And we took a couple of teams, 2 teams that had traditionally done 3 families a year. We ended up doing 10 families that year, and then we broadened the folks that were participating across the footprint. So it was easy to prove, say, look, we can put this little social site out, we can get all of these people involved, we can provide more to more people. It just makes a lot of sense. So little things like that you can prove out kind of handles the ROI thing, kind of stops people and say, yeah, let's do more of this, particularly around philanthropic stuff.
Cool. All right, over to this side. You guys both are running startups, so I wanted to give you a couple minutes each to tell us about your products. So why don't we start with Seth?
Sure. I'm never going to throw up an opportunity to pitch, but
Exactly.
just to touch
Only
on this,
fair.
just to touch on this
Go
very
ahead.
quickly. I think so. The reason we're all here, the reason we want to bring purpose into the workplace, is because we think we can A, do a lot of good, and B, improve employee morale and retention and productivity and creativity by doing it. And we're lucky, sort of as a startup, in that we're not in a regulated industry. We don't care much about regulations at all, and so we can sort of go straight to the ideal solution. And so for us, the ideal solution to solving the inside-outside tension is just to bring the outside in. And so we focus a lot on giving people platforms and tools that they need to take the causes they already care a lot about, and then volunteer for them and give through them through the guise of Amicus, our company. And so if someone's really passionate about a cause, we love to give them the opportunity to tell other team members about that cause, maybe to volunteer together or to give together. Because if they can do that and they're thinking they're doing it in the sort of framework of your company, then that's going to have tremendous benefits for all of you and for us. So in terms of what Amicus does.
How does it work? Yeah.
Yeah, so we're a tool set that basically allows people who care a lot about a cause to hit up their friends, family, neighbors in support of that cause. And so the basic problem that we're solving is that right now, if the Red Cross wants to ask any of you to say give blood, they'd probably have someone you've never met call you on your cell phone right in the middle of this session, which would probably do a little more than like moderately annoy you. If they were using Amicus, the person reaching out to you would be a friend of yours who supports the Red Cross. And so you'd be far more likely to take the call or to open the mail, and you'd be far more likely to feel pressured into giving. And so our platform focuses on making it very fun and easy for those supporters to hit up those friends, either by making phone calls, by sending emails, or by sending physical snail mail postcards with their Facebook photo on it, their signature on it, and the nonprofit's message in between.
So you guys, you plug into Facebook? Is that sort of the primary identifier of the friend relationship?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about us is we use Facebook to figure out who knows who,
right.
But we don't do any outreach through Facebook because we've done a lot of testing and we found that Facebook's not actually a very great medium for compelling action. So we use the social graph from Facebook to figure out who knows who, and then we use that social graph to turn the tried and true methods of fundraising and outreach social, like phone calls and mail and email.
And how has it worked so far?
It's working really well. We've been around for almost 3 years now. We've raised a ton of money in venture capital. We've helped some of the largest nonprofits out there win their causes. We were the main organizing platform for the marriage equality effort in 2012, which felt really, really great. Yeah, things are going great.
Terrific. Good to hear.
What do you do, Simon?
Yeah. Hey,
Oh yeah, and yeah, thank you, Simon. If any of you want to see Amicus in action, you can go to the New Museum, which is a really great modern museum in New York in Soho. And right in their lobby, they have our postcard tool on a giant kiosk. And so you can actually send postcards to your friends from the exhibit.
See, these startup guys help each other out constantly. It's really a pleasure to see. Simon, why don't you tell us a little bit more about some of the stuff that you're working on? I know it's focused on the tech community itself, which I find really interesting. As we were chatting beforehand, My tech DNA goes back to Silicon Alley in its very earliest days. I was founder of the first email newsletter here 20 years ago. And so I'm really interested in how you're trying to rally that group of folks.
So Raised by Us is a program where we're trying to help tech startups to give back, and there are a couple of different ways we do that. The first way is there's a workplace giving program, which is you're all very familiar with, where people can donate from their paycheck. The second one is, particularly what we're dealing with is new young startups. So they have very little structure in place, they've been around maybe a couple of years, and they're trying to define their culture. So they're coming to us, and we're sort of helping that. And part of the demographic you get there are generally very young people who may be first-time donors. They haven't really thought about who they want to give to. They're not very systematic. So the second component is we help educate them around who they should give to, how they should give, how you do diligence on the cause. A lot of things that no one else is teaching them and they're not going to go back to school for. And then the final part is we realize that my co-founder and I would be not the worst people, but maybe not the best people to go in and pitch this internally. So as you may have seen elsewhere, we train up ambassadors, or we call them ambassadors, internal evangelists, who then go and promote this within the companies, whether it's they stand up at the company meetings and so on. So we've been around for a couple of years, really in the giving stage for about a year. We've seen around $200,000 pledged, and relatively good, from what I understand, participation rates for the industry. That's the
And what have you learned about those employees? So, your experiences with pretty much young technology industry folks. What have you learned about their giving habits, what they're interested in, what they expect in terms of being active in causes through their jobs, through their careers?
Probably like anyone, although they a bit more, they really appreciate and expect transparency and to see where their donor dollars go and to get a feedback loop on that, which is something we've been really wanting to work on and trying to work on. Another thing is they get, this may be a common phenomenon, but they're paralyzed by choice. I've sat in during one of the sort of enrollment periods and watched them talk to each other about what they should give to, seeing their friends giving, being compelled to give something, but just not knowing what to do. So that was one of the issues they faced. They tend to like local, and given that they're all working in tech, they like tech causes in general, but there are other things too.
And do you think that they are more or less, because this is an area that I want to get into for the whole panel, are they interested in volunteering? I mean, is that group interested in getting out into the community under the company banner, say?
Yes, the challenge, a couple of things. I personally don't like running a volunteer matching organization, but yes, they are into that. The challenge is when you speak to people about what they want, one person will tell me, I really want to just roll up my sleeves and paint a school, and I don't care, it has nothing to do with the fact that I develop all day. And then I go and tell this to another guy, hey, I'm thinking about organizing a paint a school weekend, and he's like, what are you doing? I could charge $100 an hour to develop. I want to use that skill, put me in with a non-profit, and I'll do some short-term project. So they do like the idea of volunteering, particularly if it's organized for them and incredibly easy, simple and fun, and social with their friends and so on. But there's as far as I can tell, a divergence around exactly what that opportunity should be.
Do you guys have any further thought? Have any thoughts on it?
I think one of the key defining elements of this generation in terms of giving is being metrics driven. So they care a lot about transparency. They want to know that their dollars are actually having an impact. They don't just want to send the check, feel good, and be done. So A, closing the loop is very, very important. And then B, they do want new opportunities to volunteer. There's actually a really great organization here in New York called Catch a Fire. And this platform basically allows someone who has skills, so it could be an accountant or a developer or an editor. You can go on this website and you can see a whole directory of nonprofits that need those skills. So instead of just going out and painting a house, you can actually do what you're best at, and it pairs you with a nonprofit that needs that skill.
Yeah, so I wanted to, so unlike my nonprofit, my startup friends over here, I don't necessarily just focus on the millennials or even the giving. It's really about, for us, or at least the stuff that I'm working on, is really about piloting some stuff around how do we get people involved and how do we make the volunteer stuff more regular, right? Give them the opportunity to talk about the causes that matter to them, broaden the base of folks that are involved. People like to talk about, they like to work out loud, they like to talk out loud, they like to live out loud. Talk about the things that are interesting to you. So for instance, some of the things we pilot are, I travel a lot. I do a lot of volunteering at home. So I'm on 2 nonprofit boards. There's 2 other nonprofits in San Francisco San Francisco area that I spend a lot of time volunteering at, and there's a handful of others that I volunteer on occasionally. And I travel all the time, and I rarely do any volunteering when I travel. Sounds crazy, right? So I'm coming to New York. I'm going to use my mobile to figure out what the weather is. I'm going to figure out maybe some reservations somewhere. I'm going to set up some meetings. I'm going to figure out what my colleagues are available and set up some meetings. Why don't I also figure out what volunteer opportunities are in Charlotte or in New York, wherever I'm traveling as well, right? And I can sort them by things that have to do with running or some kind of activity, or maybe I want to serve the homeless, depending whatever my preferences are. And so we're trying to build that kind of capability and encourage people to say, look, this is something we know that you're interested in. You've expressed an interest in it. Now we've made it easy for you, so when you do travel to different places, do business, if you want, here's some stuff that's going on in that area, reach out and get involved. And so that's how we're focusing on it. We think that goes beyond just the millennials. I think I agree with Peter in that when he said earlier, when he started today, we look at millennials, some of the things that the catchphrase of millennial are things that they as a generation are causing, but they're affecting everybody, again, with the social and the mobile. And so we think that we have a broad opportunity to get everybody across in our organization involved, and probably even more so, the non-millennials may be traveling more than the millennials.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think we've seen a shift, kind of get back to the kind of central question from the range of volunteerism. So we've seen a shift, I think, from the paint the fence, paint the school, weed the yard kind of thing in the schoolyard to much more of the skills based. I think people enjoy kind of team building type exercises with painting the fence or working in the food kitchen, but we've also seen them with bringing a whole team in for pro bono work. So we work in Newark, New Jersey, which we view as an area that has lots of opportunities to improve. And our internal ad agency all got together to help one of the small businesses. It's a cupcake shop, which I think is something that I'm a personal fan of. But they all came together to help this cupcake shop. It was a startup. Try to figure out how to tell everybody about the cupcake shop, how to drive traffic to it and all that. And so this was completely different from the regular work that they do, but it was an opportunity for them to bring their skills in a way that was really useful to this little business, this little startup. We need to drive economic activity within Newark, and so it was a great opportunity for them. And so we're starting to see more of that thirst for, is there a board opportunity for me? Is there pro bono? Can I use my skills? But people seem to also really enjoy painting the fence or volunteering with the kids or those kinds of things. So I think that the range is expanding fairly significantly.
Let's stay with that, because I'm finding it interesting. A few years ago, on a panel like this, there would have been some discussion, more discussion of the actual technology or the networks themselves. What do we do with Facebook? What do we do with Twitter? That's faded into the background, I think, as people just accept the fact that everybody's connected and there are these networks. And what's the real strategy? How do we really reach people? How do we get to impact? And I think what I'm hearing in terms of the shift in volunteering and employee engagement is the pursuit of that impact. Like, employees are not just limited to the millennials, but employees want to feel that there's some authentic work there, that what they're doing actually makes a difference, rather than, it's great, take a day off, paint the fence, get a nice T-shirt, which is pretty standard. And I'd love to hear, because you guys both brought up transparency, so I'd kind of like to hear you guys kind of riff on that a little bit in terms of the areas that you serve, and maybe from a little bit kind of, from a generational standpoint. And I want to hear what those guys think about it.
Yeah, so I think just in terms of practical advice, the number one thing you can do to scratch that itch is closing the loop, which is something we mentioned a couple times. We have a program at Amicus where if you refer us someone that we end up hiring, we give you a cow. and it's sort of like this gimmicky thing, but we actually donate the cow to a family in the third world through Heifer International. And so I've got to see their sort of feedback mechanism. And you give them $500 for the cow. They send you a nice note with a picture of a cow. You think it's the cow that you bought, but then by the 5th time you donate, you see the same cow again. Catch on. But then
they look a lot alike.
But then they just send you the same damn mailer month after month after month, just totally ignoring the fact that you gave. And so you start to get really sick of it. And so it's not a great example of closing the loop. On the flip side, there's a great organization called Donors Choose, which basically allows a school teacher, maybe in an impoverished neighborhood, that wants to teach her kids about drones. She can put up something, it's a lot like Kickstarter, saying, I need $250 for a drone set. Here's what I need to buy. Here's what I think the kids will learn. And you can donate anywhere from $1 to the entire amount. And what ends up happening is you donate, you get an immediate email saying, thank you so much for donating. Then you get something in the mail saying, thank you for donating. But then 6 months later, you get pictures of the kids playing with the drone set. And then 12 months later, you get a letter written by an actual student in the class saying, thank you so much for allowing us to teach about drones. Here's what I learned. And the first thing you think when you get these things is like, I gotta go donate to another project. And so it's a way of both providing transparency. You can actually see the effect of your money, and closing the loop, and promoting more giving. And I think that's something that in the workplace, you can actually help nonprofits that are bad at that by being the intermediary that actually helps close the loop.
So I think Seth and I care about, and probably you too, care about transparency in the feedback loop. And I think some of the more savvy donors who we deal with, at least we deal with, care about that. But actually, a lot of people just don't care. Really, they just want to, their friend gave, and their friend came up to them and nudged them and told them, I just gave, why aren't you giving? Or they got some reward or whatever it is. And it's the social gratification, whatever.
Right.
So, and I think that probably in reality is most people. But we're skewing this because it's our viewpoint. But yeah, most people who I think we deal with are, we have a dashboard that we put up a website where you can see the participation rates. And many startups have screens all around their offices. So this is all around the office. They can see who else is given. And I think that kind of social pressure is doing more than the sort of this, and then after that, they don't care kind of so much what happened to that money. They just forgot about it. If you put it in front of them, they'll be, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
But it's not like, they're not going to lose sleep at night if you don't come back and tell them that you got the picture from the kids with the drones.
Well, in truth and in fundraising often, and in community organizing and in activism and in a lot of different things, there are people who are the leaders, kind of the super users. The organizers are going to pull together a group. This is their passion. And they're going to bring people who they know along with it. And there may be various levels, all the way down to like, all right, here, don't contact me again. Here's my check. And I think that's just a reflection of human behavior, really. It's not necessarily generational. It kind of fits the way people always operate. But it's interesting that companies are now providing the opportunity for these leaders to be able to step up and stay inside the company and do that kind of work. So I'd like to hear what you guys think about empowering that group and whether the technology really matters there.
Well, so one of the things we're doing that I want to talk about in terms of technology is, and again, the efforts that I'm focusing on are more around getting people involved. And my philosophy is, if they're involved in a cause, they're more likely to donate to it as well. But one of the things you were talking was, people want to get in and actually provide more than just painting the fence. And so we're also, there's a number of organizations in San Francisco that we tend to, one of the ones that I deal with, Build, which is a kind of a mentoring program, and then there's a First Graduate, which is, it starts in like middle school, and it's, be the first to graduate from in their family. And so they need a lot of mentors, they need a lot of people that can kind of help with tutoring and things like that. And the issue is how do we match the resources we have at work that are all willing to do it with these students that need some help that are located somewhere else. You got to take a taxi or somewhere else. And so we're using things like Skype. We're piloting things like Skype to kind of match these. So that's, the technology we're using there is simple technology they have to say, look, these guys have more to give. They want to give more than paint the fence. And they can't get out there, so let's work with the nonprofit to change the way their organization works, the program works. So we can't get there at 6 o'clock, but we can do something at 4:30 when the kids are out of school. How do we work that? How do we use technology to do some of that? And then again, the philosophy is as they get involved, they're more likely, particularly when we get to our annual giving campaign, they're more likely to give to that particular organization.
Interesting.
Yeah, and to kind of come back to the thoughts about feedback and results and all that, where it doesn't necessarily have to be kind of numeric or analytical, or it could be kind of the comments in terms of how I was involved and all that. So one of the things that's interesting to me, Prudential is a significant sponsor for Special Olympics. It's coming into New Jersey in June, and as we were developing the communication plan for it, social and the ability for our volunteers to early on start to talk to the rest of the company about how excited they are to be volunteers, to support the Special Olympics, and building in opportunities for them to share their experiences as they're going along. Regulated industry, we're a little scared of this a little bit, but giving them the chance to post their pictures as they're taking them, tweeting about it, and sharing those comments during the event, having that integral into the communication plan, I think is a fairly significant shift, and we think something that's going to be far more engaging than kind of the traditional, here's the article in the corporate intranet about the Special Olympics and aren't you excited? It's kind of the voice of the people who are really doing it, and I think it's that feedback that's showing results more so than, here's the infographic that said, 10,000 volunteer hours or things like that.
I think you're absolutely right. Empowering those change makers is how change always happens, and empowering them in your companies is very important too. I think the beautiful thing is that the tools that they need probably already exist at your companies, right? So you guys all use internal social networks, the Yammers of the world, to organize around business initiatives. And those exact tools can just be opened up to philanthropic initiatives too. I think you were mentioning that you do a little bit already. And so the nice thing is that you should think about what tools you already have in place, and maybe just suggest and empower your employees to use those tools to organize around philanthropic initiatives as well.
One of the things that's interesting for us, so the technology folks that are supporting that for us internally are far more excited about helping to develop those tools and really utilize those tools for what we have than they might have been for some of the other experiences that they have. So, as we've been working with them and bringing them into the fold, rarely do you get thanked for being invited to a meeting. But people are coming afterwards saying, thank you so much, I'm really excited to be a part of this. This is so meaningful, this means so much more to me than creating this site for this or that, the other thing. This is really exciting to me. So, it's interesting to see the technology side of the house kind of getting really revved up. They can, pardon to the technology startups, they can use their toys in ways that they haven't been able to before. And so you can see that kind of excitement, and they're kind of stretching their technological muscle a little bit to try to really engage employees because they think it's exciting.
Hey, we get to play all day. We're not.
So I just wanted to change the conversation just slightly. So we've got some of the stuff that Simon was talking about, with the startup. So the objectives of a small startup versus a Wells Fargo are very different. Yep. And so at Wells Fargo, we're talking about probably three broad things. We're talking about there are causes that are important to the company at large or to different regions, and it's how do you get more participation in some of those. There's the annual giving, and how do you get people involved in that, but also how do you get them to think about all the stuff they've done throughout the year. And then there's the how do you accommodate the desire of team members to talk about what's important to them and the causes they want to get other people involved in. And so we've got the social sites where we're allowing people to talk through that. We've got where I talked about expanding the SharePoint sites and adding social to talk about the things that are important to Wells Fargo. And then you've got the annual giving where you can start to use things like the dashboard Simon talked about and gamification to get kind of people maybe more motivated. But one of the challenges that we're actually dealing with is how do you integrate all of those things so that when you have these social sites that I'm talking about I'm talking about build and hey, I need more mentors, and I get people interested in that, how do you get that through the other pieces as well, and to know that we've got these hours and put that into my volunteer time, and how do I record the donations? And so all of that integration is not something that we have solved at the moment, right? And it's for those of you at a large corporation, those are challenges that,
Right.
that are difficult to deal with.
Right. And we're going to open it up to questions shortly. I wanted to ask one more kind of broad question, and it relates to what we think of as technology. And I want to put out there the idea that what we're constantly talking about as technology is largely visual now. And that the visual side of this, with everybody carrying around a movie camera, a camera, and the constant sharing of photos, that what we do is so visual, and that people's visual literacy as our population has essentially grown wildly. And if you don't take a picture of it, it didn't happen. And that's maybe not true for everybody, but certainly below a certain age, it's definitely true. So I wanted to kind of throw that out there as sort of a cultural concept that might inform how both the big companies and the startups and the folks and their partners work with it, sort of telling stories, giving permission, and letting those visual images kind of shine through. So feel free to jump into that one.
So I think the nice thing is that the content is going to get created, whether or not you encourage it or discourage it.
Right.
Because everyone's got their phones, everyone has their Instagram, and if there's something beautiful in front of them that's meaningful, they're going to take a photo of it. And so the key is just making sure that the good content surfaces to the top. And that can be something as easy as using a Yammer or internal social network, or just encouraging people to send those around and to surface them. But yeah, I think it's absolutely critical to tell the stories through images, because that's what moves people.
And how do you guys deal with that? Suppose there's an employee event or the annual campaign, and people are taking pictures, or they want to. But
Yeah, it is more difficult for us. I was here last week, actually. There was an event. One of our team members was being recognized at an event. I don't know, last week, and I was taking pictures, and I had all these release forms. So if it was anybody that was non-Wells Fargo in the picture, I had to get a release form. Of course, I made sure only Wells Fargo people were in the picture. Otherwise, I couldn't tweet it unless I had the release form. So we have these issues. Similar issues internally. It could be either, we might have to check the video, have to check the photo, and some of the social networks we have, it's where the stuff can be housed. So we do have more issues when you're in a large corporation. Using that in social. But you're right, the content's going to be created anyway. We're trying to figure out the best ways to, a lot of times what I do is for these chapters we have a SharePoint site where we actually put up the slideshow, and then we link the social network to it. But we kind of review the pictures before they go up.
Yeah, we have the same issues with consent. I mean, it's a fairly significant problem, and like you said, if it's Prudential employees, not as much of a problem, but if it's Prudential's employees' children, that becomes a problem. If it's Prudential employees' friends, and so on and so on. So while there's a great opportunity to have the pictures there, we also get to involve legal to make sure that we have the right forms of consent in place, and we have records and all that other stuff. So
now you guys are sounding more corporate.
Yeah. Well, I wore a tie, so I had to, right? So it probably changes the cadence a little bit. It kind of takes away a little bit of that immediacy of, well, I have a picture, I can post it. Well, we have to moderate it so that it gets posted, we check it, and all that. So that's I think a continuing challenge that we have to improve the cadence on that, so that we're not getting something posted and then 3 weeks later having approval to have it shown someplace. It kind of takes away from the excitement.
It does.
So I'm just going to apologize to the Prudential legal team for the suggestion in advance. But
if you want to take on a Prudential's legal team, go for it.
If you look at the brands that do best on social media these days, they're the ones that actually give up control. And it's horrifying to do, but it's a way of actually sidestepping a lot of these legal issues. So for instance, if you hold an event and there's a hashtag, right? Anyone who's at that event can just take a photo and tweet it, and that's not you guys tweeting it. You don't have to worry about consent, and it gets it out there. It gets it under a hashtag that people can see and share. And so, and it's always a tricky balance to not encourage that, but to allow it to happen. But that's what a lot of big brands are doing to get around these things.
We need a defibrillator, thanks.
So that's what we did. So we had, I still need the release, but if I wanted the at Wells Fargo to tweet the picture, I had to go through this whole process. But if I tweeted the picture, they could retweet it, immediately. So we know how to get around those things. But yeah, you're right. You've got to kind of mess with it, because if you, well.
Firstly, thank you for reminding me why I work at a startup. This is, this is good. I'm just sort of edging away. I don't have anything to comment about policies because we don't have any, but in terms of, or photos, because, yeah, anyway. But, well, two things. One is, it's interesting to me to hear about your, I just had an epiphany, which is not that clever, but anyway. You have massive companies, and part of what we're doing is trying to bring together the tech community in New York and all this aggregate of very small companies to get them all to do good across them. Just occurred to me, which is not particularly clever, but our entire community is probably as big as one of your companies. And I guess maybe if you thought about your companies as a community, or, well, I don't think I'd want to think about our companies as Prudential, but, anyway. So in terms of, visualization. So what we have that's a bit different to probably the bigger companies here is these companies' physical spaces are so small that they can you can get everyone together very easily. And so, for example, at Foursquare, which is one of our companies, one of the designers on their last day of their campaign wrote on the chalkboard, last day to give, and it was very beautifully done. And then Dennis, the founder of Foursquare, decided voluntarily to go up and put his name on it. And so did the head of HR. And and then from that we realized, hey, this is a great way to signal to people visually that this is working and their peers are doing it. So then we did a Photoshop file that we would update to a screen that we'd put into the companies on their walls. And that was incredibly time-consuming. So then we created a website, and we allowed the ambassadors, the people who we've trained in these companies, to input the information themselves for their peers. And we put half the screen is the participation rate and the goal, and it's all around all the screens, all around the offices. And the other half is a rotation between the pledged amount and who's given. And the who's given part is completely voluntary. So there's a little spot at the bottom that says, if you'd like to have your name up here, go to blah, blah. And they go in and they put the organization they've given to and their name. And there's nowhere to put the amount. They can't even enter it if they want to. And it's just revolving. And as they walk around their office, they can see, Seth just gave to Donors Choose. I should give to that. And for people who are either wondering who to give to or whether they should give, this gives them 2 data points. Given the paralysis of choice and just the hesitation generally, I think that may be a little kind of help.
Interesting. Speaking of paralysis of choice, we've got 4 tremendous experts up here and about 15 minutes left. So I'd like to open it up to questions from the floor. I don't know if there's a mic going around. Are you going to grab one?
Before you tell you, I have to say one thing on the not working for a large company. So I will say, and Peter's going to have to keep me honest here, I think it is pretty cool. I think 5 years running now, I think United Way has labeled us the top giver of our employees, which is pretty cool. So we have a huge impact, right? To be part of something that's a lot of policies, I'll give you that, but to be part of something where you can really see a huge impact is pretty cool.
Awesome.
Yeah, and one other note on that. So from a standpoint of what can come from a large company, if we start to look at our employee giving as compared to what the company matches. So the company matches $5,000, which I think is very generous and very nice. But we are always oversubscribed. So I think last year employees gave $12 million, and the company match only made up to 7. So we have a lot of people that are giving far more than the 5. So it's kind of a very gratifying feeling to know that there's so many employees that are that generous with their resources. Mm-hmm. And I'll have to admit, there's a part of me that's a little bit scared to see what will happen when we really engage them more. Mm-hmm. If we're so oversubscribed now, what will happen then? Mm-hmm. But scared in a good way, I guess.
Good, excellent.
You can go to the mic.
Okay, go ahead. You want to ask the first question?
I'm just curious.
Raise your hands if you have a question. He's got the first one.
Okay, because I got them. This is very powerful. We're just getting started, and we only have 6 companies, so we have limited data. I'm curious as to and I'm not sure if this is taboo or not, but what kind of participation rates do you have? employee so you talked about total dollar giving, which we can't compete with. We have 200-person or 20-person companies, which but in terms of the percentage of employees giving, I'm kind of curious if there are any. 37%. 37%. Okay, great, awesome.
I'm not sure. Maybe from the financial team. I don't remember the number off the top of my head.
Okay. First question.
Hey, Robbie Thomas with Sabre. Open-ended question related to the topic, but more about just sort of emerging technology. So it may be interesting to hear startup guys versus corporate guys, since I'm on the corporate guy side. Working for a technology company, I'm always curious kind of what is the latest technology trend, what's out there for individuals to give, and is there anything really cool that corporations can also leverage? I know about your companies, obviously, but what else is out there that's fascinating to learn about?
Aside from this amazing startup called Amicus, which would have led, so I think I mentioned one. It's called Catch a Fire. It's super cool, and I think they have actually a corporate program that allows corporations to help get their people who have high skills that nonprofits need to get involved. I think the nice thing is that there's all the platforms that you already use are things that you should be looking towards. I think one of the greatest trends in the nonprofit space is taking best practices and technology from the corporate world and just applying them to causes. And so before you think about new hot technologies, I would really think about what are the technologies that you're using to boost sales performance or to produce communication across the company, and how do you leverage those first and foremost to increase philanthropic giving or volunteerism? And I think that would probably be a really good place to start.
Any further thoughts on what's cool out there? I have an answer. I think you should look not only at what's happening in the corporate space, but the fact that the social space, social entrepreneurship space is really hot in terms of technology. And you mentioned Donors Choose earlier. There are several startups which are no longer just startups. They've been around for like a decade or more now. And there tends to be a very long timeline with that. Donors Choose, Kiva, places like that, to see some of the techniques that they've pioneered and some of the work that they've done in sort of bringing networks of people together. And also the idea of using what's on the shelf in terms of social stuff that's already there, so you don't have to necessarily reinvent the whole thing. I think that makes sense too.
So I'm simultaneously the co-founder of Raised by Us and also the director of business development at a company that makes mobile apps for startups like Airbnb and people like that. This is probably a bit far-fetched, but I guess if anyone here is making mobile apps internally, the thing that we've been talking about a lot is iBeacons, which is a way that you can kind of detect when the person is in certain areas within a room or near a place, and then deliver them particular messaging. So since you all have very large offices, and I don't know if anyone's physically donating to anywhere, but you have donation stations and prompts to give and rewards and so on. As Seth, I would probably defer to Seth in terms of do the normal stuff first, but if you want to get a bit crazy, that could be.
Great. Further questions? Yeah.
So I'm still, that's weird. I'm still trying to figure out how to ask this question, but it basically goes to talking about empowering the change makers and giving up the control. And we want to unleash the power that especially social media and getting people talking to each other about this can really unleash. But I've seen people in that position not really understand that even though it's for charity, you still have to sort of comply with laws and not get yourself in big trouble. How do you go about, especially in a company like 270,000 people, how do you go about unleashing that power and allowing the employees and those change makers to really make that change while not having them to go to jail?
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for 270,000 people. I can tell you that we have this ambassador program where we are, as I mentioned earlier, not going into the company ourselves so much, but empowering other people to do it for us on our behalf. So typically they're chosen by the payroll or the HR departments after we've signed with the company, and then we go in and train those people. And the people who have done the best in their companies and got the highest, plus 50% participation rates, apart from being type A, are given a lot of room and budget to do whatever they want, and really just pushing the boundaries of. I don't believe they're breaking any laws, but hopefully not. But I guess empowering them. So we empower them in terms of materials, and they're empowered by their company to use whatever channels internally they can. But that's obviously a lot more practical at a 200-person company than it is 270,000.
It's going to be strange for the entrepreneur to be saying this again, but you got to do what works. So this is a problem that you also have just on the business side, right? You want to give people you want to empower people, you want to give them scope, you want to let them off the leash if they're smart and passionate and entrepreneurial, but at the same time you don't want them violating laws or getting you into trouble with a big partner. And the way you prevent it on the business side is that you give them training and you give them resources and you give them all the guidelines they need in a very comprehensible way. And I think it's the exact same on the philanthropic side. So you want to give them the tools and the leeway to do what they want to do, but you need to give them very clear guidance and training on how not to step afoul of any laws. So I would just think about what you're doing on the business side and try and replicate that on the philanthropic side.
Good. Further questions? One right down here.
Hi, I just have a quick question, just because I know that in our company sometimes there's a tendency for people not to think of the things that they're doing outside of work as something that they should be bringing into work and be tracking and that sort of thing. So we're really encouraging that capturing of things that are already going on. We span all of Canada as well as in the States or TD Bank. And I'm just curious in terms of how to kind of create that stickiness or try to create that habit within a workplace so that they see that as something that they want to bring into the workplace, share with their coworkers, do things that they're already doing socially on other platforms, perhaps outside of work, but how to be bringing that in and have that be valid.
So I think it's about storytelling. So the human mind is actually really bad at comprehending data, right? So you can give people a bunch of numbers about the impact you had this year, but if it's not put in narrative form, it turns out that we don't remember it, we don't really process it. And so what I would do is I would find examples of people who have brought things inside, figure out first some way of servicing those examples, and then just tell a beautiful story around it, and then disseminate that story as widely as you can, and that will inspire people to do it themselves, and that'll keep it top of mind.
Yeah, I think our MC mentioned today that if you post to Facebook and nobody comments on it, you should. So the point is, you've got to give them encouragement. You got to give them reason to. You got to give them some kind of reward for doing it. Why does it matter? So I've already done the work. I've already volunteered here. Why do I now need to go talk about it in the corporate social network? What's in it for me? And what's in it is if you have a story that talks about other people that have talked about it, and here's what happened. They ended up getting a bunch more volunteers, or they ended up getting a bunch more money, or whatever it was. Then it's like, oh well, if I did the same thing, then that might help me out. And then you've got to do it in a community where people are actually going to respond and have a conversation about it, and not just look at it and not give them any feedback.
Further questions?
I had a quick one, actually. I was wondering if any four of you had seen examples where using social media for causes was a way to actually lead employees into engaging in a way that they wouldn't otherwise, or learn a technology that they wouldn't have otherwise if they weren't passionate about the cause. So is employee engagement and philanthropy a way to actually teach boomers and Xers, and I'm personally waiting for my 4-year-old son to be old enough to teach me technology, so to get those older generations to actually engage in a way that they wouldn't otherwise if it were for regulations or other reasons.
I think you mentioned it. He said that his technologists get really excited getting new technology when it's going to be used for causes. It's the same thing with any piece of technology. If you want to introduce a new piece of technology into your company, the best way of getting adoption really quick would probably be to have the first thing that you launch on it be some sort of cause-based thing, right? Because people get really excited about participating in those things. And so I think you could probably create your own stories. And we've certainly seen people come together around new technologies or new processes if we launch it first with some sort of cause-driven thing, because it's just easier to get excited about.
Yeah, what's interesting for us is we've had a social tool, it's like Jive, it's called Connections, in place for several years, and the use has been limited from a social perspective. It's been used more for work group and push out. But as soon as we started to bring the technology folks in and the communications folks in to talk about this, they started realizing that the philanthropic work could be kind of the opportunity to really launch the capabilities of this tool that we've had for several years, and make it kind of a showpiece of what's possible, and move it from a tool that's had good use from a work group kind of standpoint into something that's a much more engaging and sticky tool than might have been otherwise.
Yeah, and I'll just add those adoptive family situation I talked about. We ended up using that, the experience there, where we got people to come because of the adoptive family, and then we said, hey, there's some other communities you might be interested in, and we got a lot of those folks that normally, or that hadn't at the time, spent any time in communities, to join other communities because of their experience in the adoptive family one.
Thanks. Further, yeah, we have time for one more.
I'm finding that this panel is pairing well with the topic we had earlier about the millennial impact. And my question is that we're hearing a lot about individualized experience, but that also implies to me more in-depth use of the data that we're collecting on who our employees are giving to. So what does that actually look like in an ethical format, and then putting that into practice in targeting their interest through the workplace? I think that's probably something that it sounds like we're moving toward, but I don't know that it has been in depth used in the past.
Tracking, so you're asking about tracking data and showing what employees are actually bringing in. Thoughts on that, panel?
Well, I think the first thought that came to my mind was challenging in the U.S., but as soon as you start crossing borders, it becomes even more challenging. So for us, probably everybody here thinks of Prudential as being primarily a U.S. company, but we actually have more folks in Japan than we do in the U.S. By quite a bit. And so when we start thinking about data and using that data, using in the U.S. is a challenge, and thinking about how do we start to align and personalize and all that is a challenge. But then when we start thinking about, well, what does consent look like for using data in Japan or Korea or Europe, it becomes that much more challenging, and something that we're struggling with, and expect to struggle with for a little bit, because it gets to be pretty interesting as you cross borders. Now within the U.S. it's still challenging, but I think that you can use it in aggregate numbers to start to understand things, and use that to help you learn as an organization if you aggregate things out and pull the individual information out.
Yeah, and data laws are constantly changing in Europe and across the world, so it's very tough. But one of the ways you can sort of hack around this problem is if you do sort of empower your employees to bring you the causes they care about, and you allow other employees to sort of join those causes, then this is going to sort itself out automatically, right? So if you give people a platform that allows them a lot of choice, then they're going to customize their experience for themselves, and so you don't have to so much worry about it. And I'll also say that, obviously sending around large emails to large swaths of employees is not something you want to do too often, but if it's ever about, like, we want to improve our philanthropic program, so, like, let us know what you care about, like, that's something that is just going to make people happier and more productive and think more highly of the company as a whole. So I think that's just a simple survey as a way of doing that.
If you follow through.
If you follow through. That's time. So I want to thank our panel. Please join me in thanking Nathan, Jeff, Seth, and Simon for a terrific discussion.